The mess hall walls shuddered as enemy fighters breached the perimeter, swarming the barracks and zip-tying her SEALs before they could mount a defense. While younger staff screamed, 65-year-old Eleanor Ellie Vance, the woman with silver hair and gentle wrinkles who served them breakfast, didn't even flinch. She simply slipped off her flour-dusted apron, knelt by the industrial freezer, and pulled out a weapon that made the nearest attacker freeze in sheer disbelief. Until that moment, no one knew their quiet grandma was a ghost. Before I show you exactly what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting outside. Forward Operating Base Vigilance was a fortress of concrete and steel carved into the unforgiving landscape of the Afghan desert, a testament to 2 decades of conflict. It housed over 300 personnel, but its spearhead was SEAL Team 7, a unit of the nation's most elite warriors who operated in the shadows. And for 3 years, their days had begun and ended with Eleanor Ellie Vance. At 65, Ellie was a fixture, almost part of the landscape herself. With her neatly tied silver hair, a face mapped with the fine lines of a life fully lived, and eyes the color of stormy sky, she was affectionately known as Grandma Ellie. She ran the mess hall with a quiet, unwavering discipline. Breakfast was served at 0600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800, never a minute late. Her movements were economical, her voice soft as she'd ask the towering operators, "What can I get for you, son?" To them, she was a comforting presence, a reminder of a home half a world away. They loved her for the hot meals and the fresh coffee that always seemed to be waiting, no matter what ungodly hour they returned from a mission. Their leader, Commander Daniel Foster, a 15-year veteran of naval special warfare, respected her immensely. At 38, he was sharp enough to know that people who ended up in support roles on a forward operating base often had stories they didn't share. He saw the intelligence in Ellie's gaze and the subtle strength in her posture, and he was wise enough not to pry. His second-in-command, Chief Petty Officer Luis Ortega, a master weapons specialist, saw even more. Ortega had noticed things others missed. He saw how Ellie moved through the crowded kitchen, not like a cook, but like an operator clearing a room. Her back always to a wall, her eyes constantly scanning, always aware of every entrance and exit. He noticed the faded tattoo of a regimental crest barely visible on her forearm when she rolled up her sleeves. Ortega recognized the ghost of a fellow warrior, someone who had deliberately stepped back from the battlefield, and he honored her choice with respectful silence. What none of them knew was that Ellie's history was written in classified files that would never see the light of day. Staff Sergeant Eleanor Vance had been one of the very first women to serve in the Army's most elite special operations units, a pioneer in a world of men, a graduate of Ranger School, an expert marksman with nearly a dozen weapon systems. She had spent 40 years in the shadows, on missions that officially never happened. Her retirement wasn't the result of trauma, but the quiet conclusion of a long and storied career. She had simply wanted peace. At FOB Vigilance, she had found it. She found a different kind of purpose in nourishing the young warriors who now fought the battles she once had. It was simple work, necessary work, and it allowed the ghosts of her past to finally rest. But a ghost never truly sleeps. Ellie's day began long before anyone else's. Every morning at 0430, she conducted a silent inspection of the mess hall. She memorized every choke point, every piece of kitchen equipment that could be used as an improvised weapon. And beneath the humming industrial freezer, hidden behind boxes of cleaning supplies that only she ever touched, was her emergency cache. Wrapped in waterproof material was a kit she had painstakingly assembled over 3 years. It wasn't paranoia. It was a lifetime of ingrained preparedness. Tucked inside was a state-of-the-art SIG MCX Rattler short-barreled rifle with a suppressor, several magazines, a combat knife, and specialized tools for infiltration. She prayed she would never have to open that case. But 40 years in the heart of conflict had taught her that prayer was not a strategy. On the morning of October 15th, chaos arrived with the sunrise. Ellie was scrambling eggs when the first explosion rocked the base. It was distant, and most soldiers initially dismissed it as a training exercise. But Ellie's body went rigid. Her ears, trained by decades of combat, didn't hear a routine blast. They heard the distinct thump of incoming rocket-propelled grenades. Before the second one hit, her mind was already a whirlwind of calculations. Angles of attack, probable targets, response times. 30 seconds later, the base alarms blared to life, confirming her worst fears. Through the reinforced windows of the mess hall, she watched the base descend into controlled chaos. Soldiers sprinted to their defensive positions, officers barking orders. But something was wrong. The attacks were too coordinated, hitting multiple critical locations simultaneously. This wasn't a raid by insurgents. This was a sophisticated military operation. Explosions targeted the communications array and the power grid with surgical precision. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to isolate FOB vigilance, cutting it off from the outside world. Outwardly, Ellie kept scooping eggs onto a tray, her movements steady. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Routine was an anchor in the storm. Inside, her mind was racing, her instincts screaming that the main event had yet to begin. Then, through the smoke, she saw them. Figures clad in advanced tactical gear, moving with the fluid discipline of seasoned professionals. They slipped through a section of the perimeter that should have been impenetrable. These were not local fighters. This was a Tier 1 team executing a meticulously planned mission. She counted at least 20 in the first wave, armed and equipped to a standard that suggested state-sponsored support. And their objective was terrifyingly clear. They weren't heading for the command post or the armory. They were moving directly towards the SEAL Team 7 barracks. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. The SEALs were caught completely off guard, trapped in their quarters during their downtime. The firefight was brutal and short. It lasted exactly 7 minutes, a lifetime timed by the clock on the kitchen wall. The SEALs fought with the legendary ferocity they were known for, but they were outmaneuvered and outnumbered 4-1. From her vantage point, Ellie watched in horror as her boys were systematically taken down. The attackers weren't using lethal rounds. She saw the small puffs of tranquilizer darts and non-lethal munitions. They didn't want the SEALs dead. They wanted them alive. Commander Foster was the first to fall, a dart hitting him in the neck as he tried to rally his men. Chief Ortega lasted 30 seconds longer, taking down 2 assailants before being swarmed and subdued. Within 10 minutes, the entire team was neutralized, bound, and being dragged towards armored vehicles that seemed to appear out of thin air. It was a kidnapping, executed with terrifying precision against America's best. While the base's main defense force was still pinned down by the diversionary assault, the vehicles carrying the SEALs melted back into the desert. Ellie stood frozen, watching the taillights disappear. For 3 years, she had been Grandma Ellie, the quiet cook. But as she watched the men she considered her own being hauled away like cargo, something ancient and cold inside her snapped awake. A promise she had made to herself to protect these kids had been broken. With a calm that was more terrifying than any scream, she untied her stained denim apron and let it fall to the floor. Every movement was now imbued with lethal purpose. The Guardian had been watching. Now, the hunter was awake. The woman who stepped out of the mess hall was not the one who had entered it that morning. The gentle stoop in her shoulders was gone, replaced by the ramrod-straight posture of a soldier. The soft look in her eyes had been supplanted by a cold, analytical intensity. Her first priority was intelligence. The attackers knew too much. There had to be an insider. Moving through the smoke and confusion, Ellie was a gray ghost. Soldiers rushing past her barely registered the old woman navigating the battlefield with a tactical grace that defied her age. She made her way to the communications center. It was damaged, but partially functional. Using emergency overrides she hadn't accessed in over a decade, she tapped into the system logs. Her mind, a razor-sharp instrument honed by a lifetime of analysis, sifted through the data. The attack had been timed to coincide perfectly with a security shift change, exploiting a 40-minute window of reduced vigilance. The execution was flawless, but the intelligence that made it possible was the key. Only someone with the highest level of clearance could have provided such detailed information: schedules, defensive layouts, and the exact downtime for SEAL Team 7. Ellie's fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing security access logs with the attack timeline. The name that emerged made her stomach clench with cold fury. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Rohr, the base's own executive officer in charge of security. A quick, encrypted search of his financial records revealed a series of large, untraceable deposits. The traitor was identified, but knowing who sold them out didn't bring her boys back. She had to find them, and fast. Her experience told her that a professional team would be using a prepared stronghold, a place secure enough to hold a dozen of the world's most dangerous men. Pulling up satellite imagery and regional intelligence databases, she began her search. She needed a location within a 50-kilometer radius, remote enough for secrecy, fortified enough for defense, and accessible by the vehicle she'd seen. 3 possibilities emerged: an abandoned mountain mining complex, a network of caves used by militants, and a decommissioned Soviet military installation that had been silent for 20 years. She analyzed each with cold logic. The mining site was too exposed. The caves lacked the infrastructure to hold prisoners securely and were difficult to reach with vehicles. That left the Soviet base. Its hardened structures were perfect for a detention facility. The next decision was the most critical. By the book, she should report her findings and wait for a formal rescue operation. But she knew the bureaucracy. It would take days to get a mission approved and organized. Intelligence chatter she'd intercepted suggested the SEALs would be moved again within 24 hours. The clock was her enemy. For Ellie, it wasn't really a decision. Foster, Ortega, and the rest of the team were family. They'd spent their lives pulling others from impossible situations. They deserved the same. She also had advantages no outside unit possessed. She knew these men. She knew how they thought, how they fought, how they would react under pressure. The years of serving them meals and listening to their banter had given her a unique psychological map of the team. This was knowledge she could weaponize. For 2 hours, she prepared. She gathered her gear from the hidden cache, raided medical supplies, and procured a few extra items without raising suspicion. Every piece of equipment was chosen for a single, audacious purpose: a one-woman rescue mission to bring her team home. The journey to the Soviet installation was a grueling 6-hour trek through 30 kilometers of hostile, moonlit terrain. The mountains were treacherous, but for Ellie, they were a familiar playground. She moved like a phantom, her light footsteps making no sound, her silver hair blending with the pale rock. Her body, though 65 years old, responded to the demands with the flawless muscle memory of 40 years of conditioning. Age had not diminished her skill, it had only refined it. The facility was larger than the intel had suggested, and it was active. She counted over 30 hostile guards during her reconnaissance, all well-armed and displaying the disciplined movements of professional soldiers. But she found their weakness. Their security was oriented inwards, designed to prevent an escape. They weren't expecting a single ghost to slip in from the outside. Their patrol patterns were predictable, their vigilance focused on the prisoners, not the perimeter. This arrogance gave Ellie the opening she needed. At 0300, in the dead of night, when human awareness is at its lowest, she began her assault. She moved from shadow to shadow, a whisper in the dark. One by one, she neutralized the perimeter sentries, using non-lethal methods to leave them unconscious. This was a rescue, not a massacre. The central building was a fortress of modern security layered over Soviet concrete. Electronic locks, motion sensors, pressure plates. She dismantled them all with a surgeon's precision, a master at work. Inside, she found them. All 12 members of SEAL Team 7 were held in a large communications hall, awake and alert, their wrists bound. Commander Foster looked up as she slipped into the room, his face a mask of confusion that morphed into stunned recognition. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "Staff Sergeant Eleanor Vance, 75th Ranger Regiment," she replied calmly, her voice a low command as she sliced through his restraints with her combat knife. "I'm here to take you home." The escape was a masterclass in control violence. Leading 12 freed SEALs was a different challenge, but once unbound, they were no longer captives, they were predators. The mission instantly shifted from rescue to counter-assault. A young SEAL, barely out of training, hesitated for a split second, looking to Foster for command. In that instant, Ellie dropped an enemy guard at 50 yards with a single silent shot to the helmet's optic sensor, then pointed with her chin. "Rookie, cover that door." Now, the command was absolute, and the kid moved without question. In that moment, she wasn't Grandma Ellie, she was their commander. 13 of America's deadliest warriors turned the tables on their captors. The 45-minute firefight that followed was a symphony of destruction. The enemy, prepared to guard prisoners, was annihilated by a sudden, ferocious counterattack from within their own stronghold. As dawn broke over the mountains, the team regrouped, battered but alive. Commander Foster walked over to Ellie, his face etched with awe and 1,000 questions. In a low, humble voice, he asked, "I have to know, who have I really had cooking my breakfast for the past 3 years?" Ellie met his gaze, the cold fire in her eyes softening just a fraction. "Someone who learned," she said simply, "that even after you've served your time, you never stop watching over your family." The debriefing from the mission stretched for days, producing reports that would forever remain classified, but would reshape Special Operations doctrine. Ellie was offered immediate reinstatement, promotions, and any assignment she wanted. She respectfully turned them all down. Her war was over. This was just a promise she had to keep. She proved that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal is the one you never see coming, the one hidden in plain sight until the moment it's needed most. Have you ever completely underestimated someone based on their age or appearance? What would you have thought if you were a SEAL and saw your 65-year-old cook show up with a high-tech rifle to rescue you? And do you think true strength, the kind that can walk through fire for others, ever really has an age limit? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story about a hidden hero inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the legends who walk among us. Share this with someone who knows that age is just a number when it comes to courage. We read every single comment, and your stories matter to us. More stories about unexpected heroes and classified missions are waiting for you on the screen. Click on one of those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another story you won't believe.